Hello, good evening and welcome to Biz1st Review 360, your weekly roundup of the top business news and developments impacting the economy. Major developments this week: the Central Bank of Sri Lanka has decided to increase the minimum capital requirement for licensed commercial and specialized banks. We also saw that 50% of the land reclamation for the Colombo Port City or Financial City project has been completed. So that project is moving ahead at quite some pace. Meanwhile, the fate of 51% of the 2017 budget promises remains uncertain. We have more on that coming up later on in the program. Also this week, the term of the Presidential Commission of Inquiry on Bond Issuances was extended for a further 6 weeks. Will the Commission be able to complete its work within that 6 weeks, or is there another extension in the pipeline? Only time will tell. Let's take a quick look at our top stories this week.
Central Bank has increased the minimum capital requirements for licensed commercial and specialized investment banks in order to reach Basel III standards. According to a communiqué by the Central Bank, licensed banks are given 3 years to increase their capital to reach Basel III standards. Domestic licensed commercial banks need a capital of 20 billion rupees and domestic licensed specialized banks 7.5 billion rupees. Foreign banks with assets below 100 billion rupees should have a capital of 5 billion, and those over 100 billion need 10 billion rupees of capital. The environment impact assessment of the $1.4 billion Port City project will be open for public comment next month. Officials said the 269-hectare sea reclamation work of the project has reached halfway mark.
The reclamation land, the government owns 62 hectares plus 91 hectares of public place, and on the other hand, all the other lands belongs to the Sri Lankan government, belongs to the president. So it's only a leasing out process, and when the Chinese company is going to dredge sand there in the SLRDC and other Sri Lankan government-owned places, they are going to pay. They are going to pay. We have already calculated. All these calculations are based on river sand basis, not the sea sand, right? And so the almost around 300,000 rupees per perch for the reclamation work, but you can sell it out for 20 million something right now. So that is the profit earned by the Sri Lankan government.
They are paying for the resource of the
Yes, for the SLRDC they are paying. We have calculated it's $2 million. Reclamation work will be finished in 2019, but before that we will call for RFP after completion of the main stage 1.
And there is a joint company that is proposed to manage the city.
Definitely, yes. To manage the city, there will be a new company other than the Colombo Municipal Council, and also to provide utilities like water, electricity, and sewage, waste management. There will be another company. The government and the Chinese partner will form. It will be a kind of iconic smart city in the middle of the Indian Ocean that will attract a lot of investment, a lot of tourists, and also that will transform this country into a hypercenter of the Indian Ocean.
The new city, which is to be declared by the President as part of Sri Lankan territory, will be linked to Colombo through an elevated highway planned from the Katunayaka Expressway to the Port City area. From the Port City area, it will be linked to Kolpiti through an underground tunnel running through Galle Face.
No, that we have not yet signed any kind of MOU. I must clarify this thing. We have not yet signed anything, but there are suggestions, there are kind of proposals to do that. After the completion of the reclamation work, President has to declare this area as part of Sri Lanka, and thereafter he will ask us, His Excellency will ask us to declare this area as a special urban development area, and we will declare this as urban development area, and thereafter the Chinese partners and Sri Lankan government would be able to call for a RFP or EOI for developing things. But there are proposals, and not any government agency other than the President and the UDA is entitled to enter into kind of MOUs or any other thing. But at the meantime, the Prime Minister's office is working on legal basis, and the other modalities, we called it soft part of this project, how to formalize new legal system, new tax system, and all these things. They are formulating there in the Prime Minister's office. But the entire the real estate business will be done by the Megapolis Ministry.
State-owned Ceylon Electricity Board drew flack from the Deputy Minister of National Policies and Economic Affairs, Dr. Harsha De Silva, for avoiding an energy forum organized by the Public Utilities Commission.
When Hamlet was supposed to be staged, the man who was the prince had an anxiety attack and couldn't or refused to participate. It is like that today. The Ceylon Electricity Board General Manager is not here. We are talking about electricity. We are talking about Energy Forum 2017. This is organized by the regulator. I am here. The chairman is here. The invitees are here. Where is the general manager of the CEB? What is the anxiety attack the man has got? If the CEB is not able to participate in a public discussion, there is no point in entertaining these kinds of people. So let me, on behalf of my minister, the Prime Minister, express our deep disappointment that the Ceylon Electricity Board has been very unprofessional and by not participating in this important forum. And we will deal with this appropriately in time to come.
Minister De Silva said the power sector is faced with a critical issue over the delay in approving new generating capacity, which could lead to a power crisis in the future.
Now, the issue that we have at hand is a complex one. It's an important issue. The losses that the CEB is making, the prices that the consumers are paying, the inefficiencies at which we are operating are all making Sri Lanka uncompetitive. If we are to compete with the rest of the region and others we want to become, unless we have the energy, you can ignite, you can fan the flames, but how is it going to be sustained? Right? So it is like starting the engine, kick-starting the engine in a motorcycle with an empty gas tank. In times of crisis, in times of difficulty, strong people take responsibility. They say when the going gets tough, the tough gets going. If the responsibility is too much, if the challenge is too much, running away from sitting in tender boats, running away from not participating is not the solution.
On the other side of this commercial break, we'll be talking to Nilangika Fernando from Verite Research on budget promises. Welcome back to the program. Last week, we were talking about the promises that political parties and politicians make ahead of elections in their manifestos. We spoke about the general inaptitude of governments to live up to these promises. This week, we're focusing on budgets. How much of what the government says in the budget is actually followed on in the coming year? To talk about this and more, we're joined by Nilangika Fernando. She's a assistant analyst at in economics at Verite Research. Nilangika, thank you very much for coming on the program. Let me start by asking you, the budget for 2017, there were a lot of grand pledges that were made. The finance minister at the time, Ravi Karnanayaka, announced that tablet PCs would be given to school students in the advanced level grades, I believe. And now we're also hearing accusations in the political arena that the government has not spent all the money that it had allocated for expenses, for government expenses. How do you see all of this? What is your take on governments and budgets? Should the public really put much store by what a government says it's going to do in a budget beyond the deficit?
First of all, thank you for having me, Naveen. And that's an interesting point that you brought out about how if the public should really take the budget quite seriously. Well, if we actually analyze the budget speech last year, we actually see that about 24% of the paragraphs or the statements made in the budget speech are mere feel-good statements. These are without a particular allocation, an action plan, a ministry with an attached a condition or responsibility. So there's a lot of statements that are made by the Ministry of Finance at the speech itself, but not really amounting to much, especially in terms of action. So when we are looking at the last year's budget speech, especially with expecting one in 2 weeks' time, what the budget promise tracker tries to do is actually monitor how far they have come in these promises and how the progress is. What we find out is that of the largest promises made, that is everything above 1 billion, only 3% is actually on track or progressing. And we have about 32% which is actually falling behind their own schedule. So we have 1/3 of the promises of the largest allocations made. 65%
of promises made above allocations made above 1 billion rupees. There has been no movement whatsoever.
There are some which are actually broken, which means that they're actually not going to initiate them this year or being put forward to the following year. But the alarming fact of the 65% is that 51% of them we don't really know the status of, which means it can be broken, it might not really be implemented this year, or the money might be taken away and it might not even be initiated, though over half the period is gone. So it's the public money that is being taken for these expenditure proposals, but we don't really know what's happening.
What prompted this budget promise tracker for Verite?
Well, we see that there is a lot of discussion in the media and in the public towards November and December on the budget speech itself. This is when it gets presented at the Parliament, debated and approved. However, the budget speech spans a lot more than just 2 months because the implementation of the budget itself starts from January. But no one really questions after its approval if they're actually going to follow through on the proposals, which is the question we had, because you would promise the people of the country one thing in November, quite publicly in a speech over 3 hours long, but we don't really find anyone questioning them or holding them accountable to these actions. And like you said earlier, they become mere promises that you, or mere statements that you just don't really trust the government on later. So what we wanted to find out was, especially with the information that is made available, which the budget speech actually also says that the ministries are supposed to do. In paragraph 398, it states that the ministries are supposed to disclose on the websites all the capital expenditure projects that they're doing. So technically the information should be out there for people to know what is happening to these promises.
But there's a lack of transparency.
Yes.
It's surprising though from this government, which came in on a platform of promising right to information, which has been delivered on through the RTI Act. But that lack of transparency, the lack of voluntarily divulging information without someone having to actually come and ask. Does this sort of represent that the government itself is not serious about the promises that it's making through budgets?
Well, I think there are two things that we actually need to consider here. With the tracker itself, we actually try to find information in three sources. One was, like you said, voluntarily, is the information available on the website. Second is over the counter. We actually went to these officials, went to the ministries, and asked the responsible parties on this if they can give us any official information. And then thirdly, we filed RTIs, or right to information requests, because we realized we were not able to find information through our earlier two sources. What we find is that, especially through the OTCs, or the over-the-counter requests, most of the responsible individuals are not, well, they're willing to tell us what the progress is verbally, but they're not willing to confirm it by giving us a documentation or giving us an action plan that is actually should be available for the public. So we see that as much as the government tries to encourage transparency through RTI requests, that sometimes the institution itself, or perhaps years of not really being able to disclose this information or having that kind of culture, makes people still afraid to discuss this information, especially with the public. So most of the information we received, or at least we can actually have this tracker, is because of the RTI requests. And we see quite a disparity between the ministries themselves on how much they actually disclose this information. We find institutions like ICTA who actually follow up with us to see if we have further clarifications on the RTI responses that they have given us. And Ministry of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources actually make quite a bit of information available online itself, so there is voluntary disclosure there. Their action plans are now, their progress reports are also online. So these institutions must be commended, and they should be acknowledged, because they're taking forward this transparency message, but we find some ministries which are still lagging behind in trying to get on this transparency bandwagon. But I think that perhaps with time we can expect some kind of change. But since the RTI Act came in early this year as well, or the implementation of it, the ministry is taking it on and pushing that forward. We do see that lacking a bit.
In preparing this tracker, did you have a sense of a greater, or did you get a feel for a greater sense of accountability on the part of the government officers that were providing the information to make this tracker possible?
Well, yes. There were several reasons that we actually wanted to have this tracker. First is to provide information to the public so that they themselves can actually question the ministries and the responsible parties and hold them accountable. The second was for awareness, because right now there is not a lot of information out there to see what the progress is. We wanted to show that this is the progress and this is the transparency. And of course, thirdly, we want to make sure that the discussion of the budget does not last only between November to October. We want it to continue the following years as well, because the implementation actually happens in the next year. The budget is proposed only in November and December. And we often forget it after those 2 months. But actually we have to talk about it. We have to see, are they doing it? And that is, I believe, how you hold people accountable. And right now there is really no mechanism for it. So this is just one step in that direction, so the public can have that information to ask those questions.
We're going for a short commercial break. Stay tuned to Biz1st Review 360. We're talking about budgets. Why do they matter? Welcome back to the program. Budgets, they're a big deal if you work in the private sector. For example, if you're a filmmaker and you go over budget, your film's going to get cancelled. If in the private sector you come up with a budget and you don't stick to that budget, you run the risk of getting fired. For governments too, budgets are a big deal. If a budget is defeated in Parliament, that calls for elections. But what do you do once the budget is passed and the government doesn't stick to its word? We're in conversation with Nilangika Fernando, an assistant analyst in economics at Verite Research. So there appears to be a trend then that for the government, it's more to do, so the budget is more to do with sort of handouts than actually determining policy for the next 4 to 5 years.
Well, yes, that is partly true. When we also look at the budget speech itself, around 38% of what's said are the expenditure proposals, and only 8% are the revenue proposals, which is how you're going to get the money from the people itself. And most of the expenditure proposals are for welfare or building houses, building pediatric care units, and so on. But this is not just the last year's budget speech. This has been a continuing trend in quite a bit of the budget speeches that we see in Sri Lanka. And it's not limited to the budget speech itself. We see this in the election manifestos as well. So I think most politicians run on this platform of transfers and social welfare so that they can get the vote of the people. But I think it's high time that people start questioning, are you delivering the promises that you're giving us in these multiple platforms? And through the tracker, you actually can find out. The unfortunate thing is we don't have information about them. We don't know the status of them to even say, is it, are they keeping the promises? Are they falling behind in some of these cases? Or are they not happening at all? So there is a larger problem of that non-disclosure of the promise itself than even if you just say that, I'm sorry, we are not able to keep it this year.
So there's a serious issue here. You mentioned about the promises in excess of 1 billion rupees. Like, for example, you mentioned earlier on about the tabs for school students. You just mentioned MICE and the proposed export-import bank, which never really came to fruition. What does the lack of these, the failure to deliver on these promises? I mean, the money has been allocated for it. So if it's not being spent on what was promised, where is the money going?
That's an excellent question. One I think the people should also keep asking the politicians and their and the ministry officials themselves. What we find out in some of the broken promises, if you actually go to the tracker, we've attached all the information that we have received thus far. So some of them, the money has been taken away from them by the Ministry of Finance. Some of them have given a reason, for example, that the promise is postponed to the following year. But where the money gets reallocated to, we don't really know. But the general legislation or the regulation is that if there is a transfer between these budget promises or allocated expenditure, the Parliament should be made aware of it after 2 months of that particular change. But of course, this is informing them after it is reallocated, not particularly before.
Any examples of the Oversight Committee, the Finance Committee, actually meeting to discuss broken budget promises?
In whatever's available online at the moment, the committee reports, for example, we have not found this kind of disclosure yet. So there might be certain questions asked within Parliament itself by particular ministers on if they're keeping their proposals, but I have not seen that kind of discussion happen at the committee debate stage. But we hope that these problems do come up, and then they keep questioning the ministries on it. What we did find through one of our RTI requests was that all ministries are supposed to report on the physical progress and the financial progress of their proposals and their expenditure every quarter. Physical progress every quarter and financial progress every month. For the first 6 months or the first 2 quarters for the year, only 14 of the 51 ministries responded to the Ministry of Finance's request for progress, which means that not only do we not know about what's the progress of these proposals, sometimes the Ministry of Finance also might not have information because the ministries themselves are not reporting on their particular activities.
But that's a serious lack of financial responsibility. I mean, the Treasury doesn't know where its money is going.
Well, that's a big question that we're trying to answer. Yes.
It's for example, you could even say that, look, the tabs were not given to the school kids, but a 420 million rupee supplementary estimate was submitted for luxury vehicles.
That's true. So we do see a lot of supplementary allocations being requested by various ministries at various occasions. And of course, these supplementary allocations come, like I said, 2 months after that they're actually allocated. But I think it's time that even the people start questioning these things. And with the Right to Information Act and being able to actively go forward and question the bureaucrats of these organizations, the ministry officials and the ministers themselves, it's great power that the government has actually given the people that perhaps we are not even utilizing ourselves. So as much as we question these large holes in the system, we have to realize that we actually might be the answer ourselves if we start questioning that.
Well, Nilangika, I suppose this tracker is also a useful tool for politicians and officials to remind themselves of what they promised. Maybe they've forgotten. You know, maybe it was just a mistake. Thank you again for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. And we recommend to all our viewers as well to check out the Budget Promises Tracker compiled by Verite Research, an invaluable information resource. And remember, information is the oxygen of democracy. I'll see you again, same time, same place next week. Until then, don't forget to look us up on Facebook. You'll find us at Biz1st Review 360. I'm Nadim Majid. Good night and good luck.